I'm very well. How are you doing?
I'm doing perfect. Alhamdulillah.
It's
This is
so
going to be
great.
fun.
Thank you so much for giving some of your precious time. I totally get how valuable your time is, especially as a
Astaghfirullah
busy
al-Azim.
working artist with kids, family, mashallah. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Alhamdulillah, it's my pleasure.
Well, so before we get into a slideshow of your work, I wondered if you could just tell us a little bit about how you got into photography and film.
Sure. So photography started very early for me. It was actually at the age of 11. My stepfather, when I was growing up, was an amateur photographer, and so he took one of the closets of our home and built kind of a mock dark room. And so at the age of 11, he gave me my first camera, which is Pentax K1000, still remember it, and taught me how to develop film. And so I was his film developer. He would go and shoot on the weekends, and then I would learn how to use the chemicals and develop film. And then shortly after that gave me the camera, and then I would go out and just start shooting. And then I'd learned how to develop my own film at a very young age. And so, early on, I knew I wanted to be a photographer. I thought my life was going to consist of two career paths. I really believed I was going to be a professional soccer player or football player for the rest of the world outside the United States. I started soccer when I was 4 years old, and I played competitively.
Okay, we're recording now, so you can see me.
Yep.
All right. So I'm going to read this little intro, and maybe I'll just close it afterwards and play it back and see if it works. Okay. Hi, everyone. Salam alaikum. Peace be with you. My name is Medina Tanor Whiteman. I am a No, so I'm going to start that over. I did this all wrong. Hey, everyone. Salam alaikum. Peace be with you. My name is Medina Tanor Whiteman. Welcome to this Raise Karma exclusive conversation with someone who I don't think it's any exaggeration to say is a bit of a legend in the Muslim art scene. He's going to be very modest about that. He is an award-winning photographer and filmmaker whose work has been showcased on PBS, The Atlantic, Amazon Prime, and many other media outlets. He's originally from California. He embraced Islam in 1996 and has spent many years traveling to some of the most extraordinary places in the world in search of sacred knowledge. And I'm going to ask him about this in just a minute. He's joining me now virtually all the way from Istanbul, where he lives with his family and teaches photography and film. Please, folks, give it up for Mustafa Davis. Assalamu alaikum, Mustafa.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi Medina. How are you?
I'm very well. How are you doing?
I'm doing perfect. Alhamdulillah.
This
is going to be fun.
Thank you so much for giving some of your precious time. I totally get how valuable your time is, especially as a busy working artist with kids, family, mashallah. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Alhamdulillah, it's my pleasure.
Well, so before we get into a slideshow of your work, I wondered if you could just tell us a little bit about how you got into photography and film.
Sure. So photography started very early for me. It was actually at the age of 11. My stepfather, when I was growing up, was an amateur photographer, and so he took one of the closets of our home and built kind of a mock dark room. And so at the age of 11, he gave me my first camera, which is Pentax K1000, still remember it, and taught me how to develop film. And so I was his film developer. He would go and shoot on the weekends, and then I would learn how to use the chemicals and develop film. And then shortly after that gave me the camera, and then I would go out and just start shooting. And then I'd learned how to develop my own film at a very young age. And so, early on, I knew I wanted to be a photographer. I thought my life was going to consist of two career paths. I really believed I was going to be a professional soccer player or football player for the rest of the world outside the United States. I started soccer when I was 4 years old, and I played competitively. At one point I was on the junior national team, and that was my dream. I was gonna go. I had full ride scholarships to both Dartmouth and Columbia University in high school. But in my end of my sophomore year, I broke my ankle. And so I couldn't play my junior year. And so scholarships were rescinded. And then that dream stopped there in high school. And that's when I started to take photography a little bit more serious at that point.
Wow. Wow, that's incredible. And so film, how did you end up getting into film?
So my senior year in high school, my parents were divorced when I was 2. But my mother and father remained very close friends. They're still best friends to this day. And so that was a great experience for me, being able to have the love of two homes. They lived in different cities, about 2.5, 3 hours apart. And I would spend, one weekend or a week or so a month with my father. But in my senior year of high school, I moved with my father. And so I started, living with him there. And he was an entrepreneur, and he happened to just purchase, kids won't even know what this is, or what's a video store. This is the VHS ages, back when Blockbuster. Exactly.
Internet killed the video store.
So he had, watching 2-3 films a day just because I had access. And I quickly realized that filmmaking was, there was a point where I also thought I was going to be a novelist. And so when he got the video store, I realized, very quickly through a series of watching all these films, and I was watching old films, I was watching foreign films. I was just really, and I fell in love with independent film, what's known as independent film, which is like outside of the Hollywood studio system, which tend to be a little bit more quirky and sometimes a little bit more artistic, because they're not really just based on a dollar value that they can make, in the box office. And I realized very quickly that this is photography. Like, this is really just photography. Like, all of these scenes that I'm watching, you could take a screen grab of that or a still shot of that, and that's a photograph. But then there's writing involved too, right, in the films. And so I said, okay, I think I want to do film as well. So I think it was in high school when I decided I wanted to do film. I didn't know how I was going to do it, but I think it was that point when I said, okay, I'm going to combine these arts of photography and filmmaking and do both of these together. Now, consequently, I wanted to be, earlier, before that, I wanted to be a painter, because my mother's a painter, and my father's a musician. And so they actually met when my father was like touring with his band, and that's how my mother and father met. And so arts was kind of a part of my life, from an early age. My mother's a painter and a ceramicist. So like we had, 2 kilns in our garage. I used to have to mold ceramics and clean and paint ceramics, but I'm a horrible painter. I'm absolutely the worst. Absolutely. To this day, my family will make fun of me. As a joke, the kids will say, "Dad, can you draw something? Can you draw this for us?" And I'll draw it. And they're just so they can laugh. I literally, I'm stuck at 6-year-old level drawing as a 47-year-old artist. I can't draw for the life of me. So film became a viable option.
Right.
As opposed to that.
This event, actually, I've described it as a palette of light, because it seems to me, and I'm not a photographer in any shape or form. I wish I could say I was. I'm actually not a very visual person at all. I'm totally in the story element. I mean, I wanted to be a novelist since I was like 6, and I have several novels that are just sort of hanging there, waiting to be finished. Wow. Maybe one day, inshallah. But yeah, the storytelling element, you can really sense that from your Instagram. You post these stories, like you can really immerse people into a world, which is quite a talented. It's quite a talent to have in a short space as well. That's a limited sort of. Well, first of all, there's a word limit on it, but also there's an attention span limit, because people are consuming these stories literally like
yes, just bombarded, like there's thousands of images and stories a day for sure.
Yeah, so what's really interesting is your black and white photography, which I'm going to start screen sharing in just a moment. It's very different. It's like, slow down. It says, it's like a poem. It sort of says, now you're not going to keep rushing, you're going to stop. And actually, every time I start wanting to talk about your photography, I accidentally call it poetry, because it does feel very poetic. And
that's very gracious of you.
Well, this is someone who I write poetry, but I don't process visual things in the same way as most visual people do. So I have to kind of work a little bit harder. But then the concept and the story helps me, because if you see a picture that has a story, that's it, you're in. Yeah, it's like that's the entrance, right?
Well, they say, right, the old adage that a photograph is worth 1,000 words.
Exactly.
And I have a pet peeve. I think now with these kind of elongated captions, it's that's translated as a photograph requires 1,000 words. When we get into photography, I'll talk a little bit about that I believe that as a photograph should tell the story that you want to tell without explanation.
Yeah.
And just like any other story, people are going to receive it differently. Somebody might understand this from it, and somebody might understand that from it. But I do believe that, if you're doing your job as an artist, with photography, the photo should say something.
Yeah, it should speak for
And that's
itself.
not always possible, but to the best of your ability, that's what you're after, at least.
Yeah. And interestingly as well, since we're talking about poetry, that's also the sign of a really good poem, that it doesn't make everything explicit. It's like the implicitness, it's what's not spoken aloud. It's the experience of reading between the lines and then having that revelation, that little kind of illumination that you have personally, because the artist hasn't just handed to you on a plate, right? They've just said, here's a little something, and then
that's well, you're an artist, and so of course you're going to that's going to be your point of view. Some of my favorite songs in the world, to this day, I don't 100% know what they're talking about exactly. I have my idea, right? But the lyrics are there, and I can understand at face value what they're saying, but it's very clear there's something else behind this,
right?
That I'm receiving, that I'm not fully understanding. And I think that's okay. I think that's where the beauty lies.
Absolutely. And then you come back to it over and over again with and I find this in poetry, I find it in sacred texts, I find it in lots of places. I mean, that's great art, isn't it? It's like something you want to come back to, because it's not exhausted the first time.
Yes.
So talking of great art, let's start screen sharing. Oops, I have. I know you're going to be very modest, but I'm a great fan. So mashallah, mashallah. It's really beautiful, your work. I'm going to start sharing screen. Here we go. Okay, you can see that?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, right. So let's start with this one. This one is so evocative. Wow. Can you tell me a bit about it?
Yeah, so this is a photo that was taken here in Istanbul, on the Anatolian side in Üsküdar, on a very foggy morning just before Fajr. There's about a month or so every year where the fog rolls in very, very low, and it just creates this very surreal kind of fantastical landscape. What you can't tell in this photo is that to the left here, that's actually the Bosphorus Strait. And so, there, you can see that line of kind of like lights that's shining down. That's actually on the water there. That's a reflection on the water, but the fog is so thick that you can't really tell. And so I'm using a zoom lens here. I think I'm shooting on an 85 millimeter prime, meaning a long focal length. I don't actually shoot with zoom lenses. Because my training in photography is in photojournalism before anything else. And so it's kind of like more of a classical, perhaps a bit pretentious training where you only use prime lenses. And in fact, some of the great, photographers, of that really kind of put photography on the map, Henry Cartier-Bresson, Robert Frank, most of these greats used one single focal length, one lens their entire careers. Wow. And they never changed it. I know Henry Cartier-Bresson used a 50 millimeter. And when I was young and studying photography, traditionally, he's one of my favorite photographers still to this day. And so I adopted the 50 millimeter as my standard as well, just an emulation of him. But this one I believe is taken on 85 millimeter prime, so I'm a bit far away, and I just it's a lot of photography is really just you're in the right place at the right time, and you capture an image, and sometimes you're not aware of what you captured until you get back. I would love to be able to, embellish a bit and say, like, I went out here because I wanted to frame this shot in this way, and I was waiting for someone to walk into the frame. A lot of times it's just happenstance, right? It's just kind of what they call is flow, right? You're as a musician, that, like, there's some times when it's just you're feeling it, right? And you're in the moment, it's coming out of you. And then there's other times where you go out and shoot and you come out, you're out there for 2-3 hours a day and you come back and there's nothing. You just didn't get anything. I imagine it's the same when you're writing lyrics or, writing a new song or a new chord sequence. Sometimes it flows, sometimes it doesn't. So for this particular image, I just knew I wanted to capture this. So there's actually a series of images that are taken at this time. And from this sort of vantage point, or where the fog is rolling in, and it's a series that I titled "On the Edge of the World." Yeah, it really gives you that feeling. You can't tell what's out there, and photographically speaking, it's there's some mistakes in this, right?
Oh yeah.
If a critic was going to see this, there's some, my framing is a bit off. There's a clear subject in the frame, which is this man who's in, kind of like a darker shadow, and he's smoking a pipe or a cigarette or something, which is what that smoke is coming up on the right. But he's really crushed against the frame there. And so I think a critic would say, like, what are you doing? And there's all this kind of free dead space, right, to the left upper corner of the image, which is kind of just is empty, and there's nothing going on there. And so I think maybe photography critics would see this and say, like, it's not good. Like, you should have framed it a little bit better. You're not following the rule of thirds. Your subject is dead, mid center of the frame to the right. But for me, I framed it this way intentionally because I wanted the space to be a character.
Yeah.
I wanted to frame him in that space. Like, what is that that's there? Like, there's nothing. Whereas everything else is this emptiness. And sometimes, that you're shooting for a feeling sometimes. And, when I'm out there shooting and I can't see what's there across the Bosphorus, like right across the Bosphorus there, Europe's on the other side. So I'm standing in Asia taking this photo, literally just half a mile away is Europe. But in this moment, it's gone. Like, you can't see it. And if you didn't know that, you'd have no idea where it was. And so that's what drew me into this type of environment to shoot. I do, it takes years and years and years to be able to talk about your work as some sort of style, and a lot of times style is not intentional. It's just over the years of shooting so much, you find certain themes in your work. I would love to say that my style is intentional, but it's not. I shoot for emotion. I shoot for feeling, and I think a style, if you could call it that, is quite pretentious, but that has emerged is I have a minimalist approach, I think, to photography. I don't like crowded images. I try to, most of the time isolate my subject so that there's just one subject in the frame or two subjects, and that's very clear when you can see the image, which is why this gets a bit difficult because, I don't do traditional street photography or traditional photojournalism. I don't follow the rules of those genres. But I'm hesitant to call it fine art, because there's a huge debate in the photography community of whether photography is even an art or if it's just a technical trade. And it's, there's like 50-50, against each other. So if someone hears me say, like, I do street photography, but fine art street photography, a lot of people just be like, oh, he's just full of himself. But because I wanted to be a painter, I like to capture images that look like paintings, that feel like paintings. So this one was just, there's a time of year in Istanbul where it looks beautiful like this. Europe disappears, and it creates this kind of weird, eerie kind of feeling. It's a bit unsettling, but also at the same time, there's a bit of serenity in it for me as well. And I'm fine with that being my interpretation and other people not feeling that. That I'm totally fine with that. I shoot for myself.
You know what I really like about this, apart from, I just love the whole composition of it, but I love this telescope here. Can you see? Alhamdulillah. It's like, okay, so here's all this emptiness, but it's not empty. We know it's not empty. It's just that you're standing on the edge here, and you're like on the human edge. This is the human edge of the world. But out there is like, it could be anything. It's like dream world or something like this. But there's a telescope. So at any time, any of these people can walk over and put their eye to it, and it's like just a little suggestion. I just find that really, really beautiful. There's something out there. We're not alone.
There wouldn't be a telescope there if it was just nothing.
Exactly. There you go. That's the visual storytelling, which for me, it takes me a little while to kind of, for the penny to drop. Right, I'm going to move along because I've got a number of other I wanted to call it a poem. A number of other photos I wanted to talk. This is so beautiful. Was this taken in Istanbul as well?
This is in Istanbul. This is actually taken from my daughter's bedroom window. Our house overlooks a school, and there's a playground there. And at a certain time of day, there's these deep shadows. It's getting close to golden hour at this time. There's these deep shadows, and sometimes I just watch. And I noticed that this child on this day was having a blast playing with his own shadow.
Oh.
And he was just running. And then there was I didn't capture this, but there was a moment where he's facing the other way and he's running and he's trying to step on his shadow. And it's just not registering to him that he's not going to be able to catch up to it. But he tries very, very hard. And so this was just one of the images I took that day when he was out there playing. And I love it because he's, caught midair.
Yeah,
I
he's
love how he's
floating.
framed. He's framed with the shadow there. I like the framing of the dark shadow above him. Again, for me, there's a suggestion of emptiness, suggestion of space. Now, literally 5 yards behind him is the schoolyard. I mean, it's a school building where everyone's at. But in the photo, you can't really tell that. Yeah.
I love that. It sort of captures for me the fleetingness of childhood, that it's just like this moment floating in the air and then it's going to be gone.
and then you're going to be 47 years old wondering what did you do?
I was thinking more of the adolescent children, but yeah, that comes after. Okay, this is really interesting. I wanted to ask you about this because I remember you posted something to Instagram. It was probably around about a year ago. And you said that you were going to start separating your photography and how you shared it, because there was some photos that were kind of overtly religious or Islamic, sacred, and those were the ones that tended to get a lot of attention, whereas the street photography didn't tend to get so much traction. And I find this a very, very, very interesting topic, especially for us at Raise Karma. This is kind of a conversation that we're engaged in quite a lot. What is sacred? Is it not just a sacred to see a child playing with his shadow, right? What would you say about that?
So that's mashallah, that's a conversation. We might need a part two.
We might
to really expound on that one. What it was for me is that I believe that art, as an artist, you're constantly evolving. And it's to me, it's synonymous with the spiritual path. You're never going to arrive. It's a lifelong journey. And even as an artist, I'm still training, I'm still learning. I still take tutorials, I do workshops myself. I'm still like devouring the art to be able to get better, to perfect the craft. And so there's a moment, I think I remember exactly the state I was in that moment where you're Spain. It was about a year ago. And I was actually in a state of kind of flux. I didn't know what to do, because I had my art that I cherished the most. And that would often be, some of the previous images, like the street photography, because of there's an element in it that, and this is why I like street photography or photojournalism or fine art street, whatever the label is, as opposed to doing studio work. Like, I don't shoot weddings. I don't do portraits in the studio. I don't do, senior portraits. I actually don't make money from photography. It's not something that I've monetized. It's not my career. My career is in film. And it's not really a good career. I lose money in it, but my main, the way I make money is in consulting. I do consulting and, but photography is not something I've ever monetized. And even to this day, I don't sell prints. Like, I've been asked many times, like, can we buy prints? Can we buy prints? And I've done some stuff for charitable stuff, but for my own self, I haven't done it yet. And I'm worried a little bit about that. There was a photographer that I was reading about once, and he said, I absolutely loved photography until I got paid to do it. And I can understand that, because then there might be compromises. I never wanted to be a technician. I never wanted to be an interpreter of someone else's vision, because for me, and this is something I didn't mention earlier, at a young age, I grew up in sort of a broken home, with some challenges. And so photography for me was an outlet. It was an escape. And I don't have those images anymore. I wish I did from when I had first started out. But if you were able to like do what you're doing here and like scroll through them, it would have been 90% images of families laughing and playing together at the park, or I was living vicariously through my lens at that moment. And it was really it was an escape for me. My father said that fiction books were his escape from his troubled childhood. And we all have those troubles, and those struggles of just coming of age is difficult. And so for me, photography has always been something that's extremely personal, extremely personal. And this is actually I've never done this, to be honest. I've never had someone look at my images and then I talk about them. This is the first time I've ever spoken about my intention of my photography. I've never, ever done this. Like, what were you intending? What was the thought behind this? I've never done it because it's so vulnerable to me. And so, with the advent of social media now, that it changes things. Because if I was going to get recognized as a photographer before the internet and before social media, I would have had to just be really good to have like an art curator or a gallery come and see my portfolio and then want to feature me in an exhibition or something. Whereas with social media now, you can share it and you can get instant likes from it. People will like it. And so that issue that I was having between my kind of fine art versus my more religious or spiritual art was more of a question of what is not a question that I was having internally. It was more of a question of who do I want to create for? Right? Like, because I know I could take a picture of the Kaaba or of the dome of the Prophet Muhammad SAW in Medina, and even if it's a mediocre image, maybe overexposed, off kilter a little bit, not fully, it's still going to get praised because of the subject of the photo. And for me, knowing that it's mediocre and getting praised versus perhaps maybe an image like this that means something to me, that this might not be a fair image, maybe because they would still see the religiosity in this. But
it is fairly subtle, though, that it's got a person sitting in a very contemplative position, not necessarily in prayer. They could be sitting in dhikr. They could be just sitting there, just being present, right? As you were talking about, just having that, entering that moment, entering that flow, and just sitting still with the light on them and the shadow cast behind. It's a very beautiful picture, partly, but also because it's just very grainy and has a kind of a nostalgic feeling, like it could come from the 1920s or something, like from some Turkish archive, or I don't know.
So that's me painting it. That's me literally in post-production going in to make the image look this way.
Tricks of the trade.
And so, but what I do is like, I have at this point, I've been shooting for my entire life. I can see the edit when I'm shooting the photo. Right. And so I'm shooting for the edit. Like, I know I'm going to do this to this image. And I know at this point now what light's going to do to the image. I know that in order to get this style, I have to overexpose the image, where I'm going to lose details in my way. Again, this would be a mistake. Like if I were to submit this to a contest, they'd likely reject it. But I wanted it to. This is the best way to explain it. The way I edit my images is an attempt to display how it felt to me to shoot it, to capture it. Right. Wow. And so this isn't a representation of what was actually there. Right. Like if there was someone next to me, they didn't see this. They didn't see this. This was not how it looked. There was a lot more detail. There's no grain. It's really clean. Like the masjid's pristine. It was in color. The masjid's pristine. But this is how it felt to me when I shot it. And then I edited the image that way. And so just really quickly back to what you were saying before about that dichotomy between the street work and the religious work. I was in this flux of this type of work that I was doing, like the kid jumping. I would share it publicly, and it just wouldn't get any engagement. Like nobody would care, really.
Even this kind of thing.
This also didn't do well. Like if you go back online, it didn't do well. But I could easily go and do vacation style tourism snapshots here in Istanbul every day, because there's masajid on every corner, and I could just walk by, take a quick photo, walk by, there's a minaret, okay, cool. There's a man with a turban, got it, right? That woman has her hands up in dua, captured it, and then do really quick edits and post them, and then to fanfare many times, But as someone who is creating for the emotion of the creating, that hurts.
And for the love of the craft as well. I mean, if you put so much, you've got so many years of experience behind you, for one thing, and then on top of that, you're pouring your skill and your craft and your know-how into making something that is a work of art, and it's not just an image of something that is existing. So it's not just, it's like, are people praising the minaret or are they praising the photos? So like, it's a very tricky one.
And it's very vulnerable.
Yeah.
So like, it's kind of like sharing something, and then, social media is so confusing,
Oh
because
man.
if it doesn't do well, it doesn't matter how long you've been doing art, or what
Yeah.
number of accolades you've received.
You
it
take it
still
personally.
matters to you. You still take it personally. So there was a moment in my life where, about a year ago, when I was thinking, I don't know if I want to share this anymore. I don't know if I want to share this part of me anymore, because I don't think it's going to be received. And in fact, I had conversations with my wife and said, I don't think that my art will be understood in my lifetime. I don't think that it's going to fully be understood
I hope it will.
what I'm trying
Inshallah,
to
it
say.
will. But
Because I
it's
am trying to say something,
yeah.
I'm using it it is a communication tool, but I think I've settled somewhere with it now. And this image is a good image. It's beautiful that you asked that question with this image, because to me, this image is the fusion of the two,
Yeah.
right? This is a religious, a spiritual image. It's taking place in a mosque, and there's someone obviously in contemplation. I think Muslims seeing the image will know that he's facing away from us. But I think, if you didn't know, you can't tell if he's looking at you
Yeah, that's
or
a good
not.
point.
It's not 100% clear, and so that creates a bit of a eerie thing. But this, with the stylization of it, and me attempting to edit it in the way that it felt when I took it, I feel there's some symbiosis there, and I've kind of settled in with that. So like, even recently now, probably within the last 3 or 4 months, probably the majority of the images that I'm sharing now are less standard street photography, and more a fusion of street and spirituality. Because I think that is representative of who I am. I'm not an artist that's devoid of my spiritual path.
Yeah.
And, and I think maybe it could have been a mistake of mine of trying to separate the two.
Yeah.
Because I'm not separate, right?
Yeah.
So there's not a moment whether I'm shooting a photo of a man walking on a path smoking a cigarette. That's not less spiritual to me than this image of a man sitting in a mosque, because it's not the image itself that's determining that for me. It's how I'm feeling when I'm shooting it. So when I'm shooting that image on the Bosphorus and there's that vast space there, it just reminds me of like, it's just to me that it reminds me of Allah, because there's just this unknown. Like it's just, we really can't know you in this life, but you're there, right? Yeah. But that doesn't translate in the image itself. So
but
that
I
was, I think that dichotomy.
I think you've used a very interesting word as translation. I think that's a really useful concept here, because what we're doing is I think a lot of the time with art, probably all of the time, an artist is trying to take something out of the unseen and take it into the scene, right? To be able to try and communicate it, whether you use actual words. I mean, a word is just like a picture of, it's like a symbol of what it really is, right? The concept is beautiful, pre-existing, and it's maybe it's even a universal thing. For a lot of the time it is a universal thing, and the word itself it's like using red or blue or green or something like this, depending on which language you choose. So this is a visual language. I'm going to move on to the next one, but I want to keep talking on this topic. Oh, hello. This is a really beautiful profile portrait. I mean, can you tell me where you shot this?
So I shot this in the Gambia at when I went to visit one of my teachers, Sheikh Muhammad Haidar al-Jilani. And this is a man who's known by many people in the Gambia by the name of Hajj Kunta Kinte.
Oh, wow.
And he's someone who's very close to Sheikh Muhammad. And he's actually related to the Kunta Kinte from Alex Haley's book, The Roots. There's a very well-known tribe in the Gambia, but they do trace their roots to the Kunta Kinte and Alex Haley's book. And they remember Alex Haley because Alex Haley was actually in the Gambia doing research for the book Roots when he was there. Yeah, so the tribe, there's people who remember Alex Haley being there. And so this is Hajj Kunta Kinte, who's one of the people who received us the first time I went to the Gambia, who was a gracious host. We stayed with him. He has a lodge there, and he hosted us. And so somebody who's very, very beloved to me. The image didn't look like this. This is,
well, this is why it's so interesting to have the conversation with you while looking at these pictures, because we wouldn't have known that unless you had written a lengthy caption, like you were saying, like to try and avoid having to put all that information. But as a photograph, as an image, it just has this feeling of like there's this very beautifully kind of sinuous line of light, and then it's just suggestive. And it as somebody who who is an artist working from the place of having a spiritual path, it's like that's what we are. There's just this thin line, this outline, and then the rest is this beautiful vastness, right?
Speaking of the spiritual path, the moment that I took this picture, what he's doing, and he's got kind of a stern look,
Yeah,
you know,
he's serious.
he's clearly not smiling. He's serious. Sheikh Mohammed is actually giving a talk about 5 feet away from him, and he's engrossed in what Sheikh Mohammed's speaking about. And so there's actually a spiritual lesson at the moment when this photo was taken. Now the photo was taken in color, because I shoot in color and then I convert to black and white later. And this is edited, you know, like in the photo, we can actually see his profile. We can see it. And so I just really crushed my blacks and really kind of went in and almost painted it with my brush to make it look this way, because it is what it felt like to me. Like this, it was in that moment, it was just him. Right. And it was just him focused. I was focused on him. That's where my lens was. And he was, you know, this is why, you know, you mentioned like, okay, you went to study. The reason why I never achieved scholarship like some of my peers is because in the lessons, I'm just taking pictures and I'm focused on the picture and I'm not paying attention to what the Sheikh, to what the Sheikh is saying. So the lesson's over and they're like, wow, that was profound. We're so enlightened. We're so enlightened now. We've gained
like,
so
what?
much knowledge.
It's
and
over already?
It's like, what'd you guys learn? I just took a couple photos.
But you were probably listening to it without realizing. It may have gone in even deeper for you not having.
Well, I've actually talked about this before. I said that my lesson and what I've learned most from my teachers isn't what they said. And what I've learned most from my teachers has been watching them, because as a visual artist, I watch differently. I'm paying attention to the nuances of, you know, how their lips move, how their body moves when they're speaking, and what does that translate to in a visual piece. So this was one of those moments where, you know, again, looking at this photo, it might not feel spiritual to the person that's looking at it, but for me, this is the same feeling I got shooting this photo that I would if I was at the Kaaba shooting a picture of the black stone. To me, it's the same. The feeling that I get of spirituality when I'm shooting it is the same.
Yeah, I love also the fact that it's like a light coming onto his face, and he's listening. He's engaged with he's listening to a sohbah, which is like the light coming onto his being. Oh, there's all kinds of things.
I'm gonna have you write my captions now.
Oh, you know what? I can come up with any old thing, but you know, I genuinely do think that that's what it said to me. That's what that picture said to me. Here's more of something more, kind of similar to what we had in the first one, of this like evocative, slightly eerie, but here we've got the lamp, the street lamp, and the man looking at his phone.
Yep. So same time of year, right? This is pre-Fajr, dawn prayer, and this is in a local park that's literally just a block away from my house. I walk through this park every day to get to my studio, and it was strange to me that someone was up at that time, and that they were out in the park. And I think this is at the beginning of lockdown when COVID hit. And so I think we weren't supposed to be out at this time, so people would sneak. And I just remember looking and seeing it and seeing the image and seeing like, oh wow, there's only 2 light sources here. There's the light coming from above him, and then there's the light coming from his phone. And this is that might make for a beautiful composition. And so there wasn't a lot of spirituality going on for me. This was more probably about the image itself and the photography itself, but I just really liked the minimalism of it. And then I liked that the light was there, and that there's this space behind him that you can't tell, 5 meters behind him is an apartment complex, but you can't see it. And then I liked the sign on the tree for some reason. It drew my attention.
What did it
because
say?
It kind of, I don't know. it's probably in Turkish. When I don't speak Turkish yet, which is actually quite shameful. I've been here for 4 years now. But I like that light there.
Is being picked up.
It felt like another light source for me. And it kind of it balanced the image in a way where it creates this kind of triangle of light now between the light, the sign, and this man. And then he's framed on both sides by trees. And I just like the look of it and the aesthetics of it.
Can't see the wood for the trees. Well, it's just something that so many people will recognize as well. I mean, like it's in a natural setting. I mean, for all you know, he's in a park, right? Or he is in a park, but for all you know, there's no apartment block nearby. I wouldn't have known that was at dawn. I would have guessed that was at nighttime. So there's a kind of an uncertainty about it, which is intriguing. And then I'm glad you pointed out that little notice, because it's blurry. So it's like, you don't know what it's saying.
Yeah.
Could say anything, because they do not smoke here.
It probably says no smoking.
Do not take photographs.
Probably. I've taken quite a few photos of signs that say no photographing. I have a whole album of those.
That's probably one of those things that, photographers kind of have to do. It's like, if you're a graffiti artist, you got to tag certain places to like earn your stripes.
That's exactly it.
Oh, I love this one. I remember somebody commenting when you shared this to Instagram that it's like those shadows, there's several shadows. It's like there's his soul and there's the shadow of the soul.
Beautiful. That is exactly what I felt when I shot this. This is my stepfather.
Wow.
I was visiting my mother maybe a year ago was when I was there, and this is in his bedroom. And I think he's actually my mother's she does kidney dialysis now, so I think he's actually preparing some of her meds for her.
Oh wow.
And he's got his back to her, and I saw this and maybe I saw it, and he and I haven't always been on great terms. We had a rough childhood together. Equally my fault. I was just torment to
delinquent
him, poor guy. Just horrible, just absolutely horrible. But we're great now, and we're actually great. We're great friends now. And I don't know, when I was looking at this, when I was shooting it, the dark shadow to me was the old him. And it was really an emotional, this is a really emotional photo for me, because the dark shadow was the old him. And then there he is there now in his late 70s, he was a real strong man I was afraid of when I was young. And now he's kind of frail.
Yeah, his
and
shoulders
he spends his days
hunched.
He's just kind of meek a little bit, spends his days just serving my mother. And then that shadow was there. And when I saw it, it brought up some old feelings from when I was young. And then there was this kind of weird double shadow.
Yeah.
And I think it was just a fleeting thought to me that he's not that anymore. He's that's the old him, and there's this new him, and then there he is there. And so there's like kind of new beginnings. I know some other people said it's like, the angels, the good angels and the bad angels, and that maybe that's what they got from it. That wasn't what my intention was, though, because again, it was very extremely personal. I love this photo, and I don't say that about a lot of my work. Most of it, I take it and then that was it in the moment. But this one I really, really do love, because it's very, very, it's very personal to me, because what you can't see in the images of my mother's laying in bed, they're behind him, and I'm actually shooting over her to take the image. And then she's, really frail and in her late 70s now as well. And, and she's sick. And then, here he is, and they used to be at odds with each other. And here he is, like, spending his latter years just taking care of her, just very gracious. And for me, it was an image that just, we can change, and we will become different beings. But whatever we did, and it's still there.
Yeah.
Right.
It's talking of the shadow, it's just, Jung talks a lot about the shadow. It's like all the sort of suppressed things that are not addressed, they're not brought out into the light, they're not witnessed. You carry them around with you. They're always like on your back. They're your shadow. They're kind of like your baggage. And subhanAllah. But
so I don't know if you've picked this up yet, at least in the images that we're looking at yet. I don't shoot a lot of faces. Like a lot of times people's expressions are obscured for me. And again, this is one of those things I was saying that I don't know if I do that. It's not when I'm shooting, I don't show the face. But when I look at my images later, I realize that I don't do a lot of portraits where people are, and even if I do have those type of portraits, I'll change them so that you can't really tell what someone's thinking. I don't know why I do that, but it is something that I found as a kind of a theme throughout my work.
Again, I think it sort of points to the ineffable, doesn't it? It sort of says, well, you can make up your own mind about who this person is and what kind of face they have. This is the Sheikh Zayed Mosque.
Yep, Sheikh Zayed Mosque in Abu Dhabi. Yep. I shot this in 2007, just after they finished completing the mosque. I was able to watch them build it because my family and I were living in Abu Dhabi at the time when the Sheikh Zayed Mosque was being built, and I was working in a place that was literally just a few blocks from it. So periodically I would go and then I would shoot it. It doesn't look like this.
You invert it?
No, it's not inverted. It's just heavily edited. I made it monochrome. I made it black and white. It's
very brilliant white. Like normally you see photos of this and it's like blindingly white.
Super, super white. Yeah. And this is actually taken during the day. So this isn't a night shot. It's taken during the day. I just really, really edited it. I embellished it in the edit. And there's no rhyme or reason for this one. I think I liked how it looked when I did this. And then I kind of liked how the two mosques, they have a hint of like a crescent moon on the top of them. Yeah, and I just like the look of it.
For me, it kind of makes me think of planets, like, we're in a distant galaxy and here's sort of two moons almost. But it is funny, going back to what we were saying before about photographing something that is sacred. In Quran it's constantly exhorting us to look at nature, look at the beauty of trees and the mountains and rain and the birds and things like this. It's not saying look at the mountain. It's not saying look at mosques, because at the time there wasn't really anything.
Exactly. So this is me also. This is me in my latter years. This isn't a style that I did maybe 2-3 years ago. I think this is me learning as an artist how to combine my own personal style with the spiritual art, and like putting my own signature on it. And I think that's why I like street photography, and I like candid photography, because I like the fact that if I'm capturing something and freezing it in time, and if I wasn't there in that time, in that space at that time, this image wouldn't have been created. And I think that is why the kind of travel log photography of mosques, especially here in Istanbul, there's images of the Hagia Sophia or the Blue Mosque that you've seen 100 times, right? Because it's just, people go and they take that photo. For some reason, for me, I want mine to be unique. I want it to be timeless. I want it to be something that's not easily duplicatable. And I think that's why I like candid photography. So even like with these type of shots, I don't use a tripod. I'm never going out setting up my tripod at a certain time of day to capture the sun when it's right behind the minaret. That's not super interesting to me. What's interesting is like when I'm out and about, what I see, I shoot.
Yeah, it's in the moment.
Yeah.
So, this is phenomenal. It's the most subtle portrait I think I've ever seen. And at first I was like, is that actually a person? Is there a person in there? But I think there is, right?
There is.
I don't know. You tell me.
There is. That's my son Ahmed.
Oh wow.
Yeah, and that's taken here, actually just a few feet beyond where I'm sitting right now in my home. The door to the room that I'm sitting in now is kind of a fogged glass door.
Wow.
And there's a hall light that's coming straight down, and so if someone stands right up against the door, it creates this kind of very surreal look. And then again, this is in the editing, I added some grain.
I was going to ask you about that, if you added noise or something.
I added a lot of noise. I don't know why I wanted it to kind of feel like it was underwater a bit, like to evoke a feeling of it's a child. I think you can tell if you look close enough, but I wanted to evoke a feeling of drowning for some reason. I think it was just the state that I was in that moment.
You have other photos though, which I will come to in a moment. I'm not sure where I put them in this list, but who's this?
I have no idea. This is shot outside of the Fatih Mosque here in Istanbul. There's a very bright kind of marble flooring outside of it. So at a certain time of day, if you overexpose your image by a couple of stops, it'll just become white. Wow. Like this. And so this is edited just so that we could keep his shadow in there. But I've been exploring a lot lately with a lot of white space as well in my images, because I do a lot of dark images, but I wanted to kind of explore, light and shadow with dark images. Again, there's another image where you can't see the face of the person.
It's kind of
but
blurry.
I just liked how the light fell, and I liked the shadow.
It's like a sort of an hourglass shape as well. It creates this hourglass shape.
Interesting.
Like it makes me think of Teen Angel or something like that. Like he's just exiting heaven and arriving on earth, this lovely sort of pavement.
And there's a space, you don't know where he's at. It could be anywhere.
Yeah, right. It could be an airport or something, right? Yeah, this is so cute. Is he actually on the van?
No. So this image is usually, this image usually misses people. I don't think people usually get this one. I called this one Tiny Guy, I think. And what it is he's about maybe 20 meters back, standing on a platform.
Because it's completely weird perspective, right?
Yeah, it's just complete. So he looks tiny. He looks like, and I just framed it in a way where it looks like he's standing on top of the van. And for me, it was, I thought, I was like, wow, this is really clever. Look at how this looks. But I remember sharing it, and people were just like, eh.
What? I get it. Here's the kind of twisted tire over here, and then there's this this is actually, I think that's a red-rooted pigweed. It's a kind of a wild amaranth.
MashaAllah, I'm impressed. I would have said that's a giant weed.
Yeah, well, it's meant to be very nutritious, not just for pigs.
But it does, I think that it does help the image. It gives it a little bit of balance. I think if that was just dark there, I don't think the image would have worked.
And then you've got this kind of overarching mimosa. I don't know what that is. It's not a mimosa. It's some kind of leguminous tree or something over here. And then you've got this.
And it kind of frames him a bit.
Yeah, it frames it, and then that's light in the dark, and this is dark in the light. It has a nice symmetry to it. I like that. Okay.
Yeah, so this was, I think, 2012. I went on Umrah, alhamdulillah, and I was done with my Umrah at one point, and I just went down to the Kaaba just to reflect, and it was the first time, and I had been before, many, many years before. I've been several times, alhamdulillah, by Allah's grace, but I've never done photography there at that point. And so I was there, and I just had my phone, and, I never want to disturb people when they're in worship. I don't want to be that kind of, photographer. Obviously they're experiencing a very personal moment. Would you stay right there with your tear or hold on so I can capture that? This is going to be great for my portfolio.
Look really
so I never
plaintive.
wanted to do that. But I noticed when I was down there that, I hadn't spent that much time just sitting there in front of the Kaaba. And it was just kind of really, I don't know how to describe it, just awe-inspiring. Just people, and they're pleading, like just they're not thinking of anybody else. They're pleading, and they're there. And so I wanted to capture that. I wanted to capture this is what it feels like when you're down right here on the floor. Next to
all you see of them is the hand. You don't see because they're covered. And maybe these Iranian women, I don't know. They're wearing some kind of like a
And their faces are just pressed up against the Kaaba.
So it's like they're annihilated. It's like they've gone. They're not even there anymore.
And it's subtle. And I think if the hands were there, it'd be difficult to understand. Like, what are they doing? What is that?
You wouldn't even know that.
It's almost like the hands are just floating there.
Yeah.
But once you see the hand and then you see the shape, there's like, okay.
That's a woman as well. It's a feminine, because I guess it's a kind of a feminine hand. But then having this scarf over them, you know that's a woman. I would love to find for you. There's an amazing narration. I think it's Zulnun al-Misri, or it might be somebody else who recorded 4 women at the Kaaba, and they spoke aloud. They were really just talking directly to Allah in this incredibly plaintive way. I have to find it for you, because I would love to. It would be the apposite caption for that painting. and actually, one other thing I wanted to say about the previous portrait that we saw of your son, there's something very old about them, like I guess because of the edit and the grain and the noise. it feels like it's a daguerreotype or something, like it's coming from a
Mm,
different, like 2 centuries ago or something, like
mashallah.
really old archival photos or something.
That's
Mashallah,
a
it's,
that's a compliment. Alhamdulillah.
yeah, well, I mean, I have that sort of nostalgic kind of thing going on as well, but that sort of timelessness. This is what I was going to come to when you said the
Mm,
portraits of people drowning.
yeah.
Hmm.
This is my eldest son, Muhammad. He's obviously much older than this now. This was taking maybe a decade or more ago, about a decade ago. It was just an idea I had. I wanted to explore the intersection between water and in the human body, and a way to express emotion.
Mm.
And this actually ends up becoming later. It becomes a series that I did last year called Colorblind, where
I
I've
think I
actually
have it
colored
here.
them.
Let's see.
And
Is that the one I've? Oh no, this is another one. And I
yeah,
think the
the
next
very
one after
same
this.
series,
Here.
same time. Yeah,
Mm.
and so these images end up becoming the way I expressed my pain through the police killings
Mm.
of Black men in America. And this was something I did after the George Floyd
Yeah.
killing,
Mm.
because race became the topic of the day, and there's
Mm.
all these people speaking for people, you know, as a, you know, my father's a Black American, so as a Black American myself, it was something that was really hurtful. So I ended up using that same series of images to express this. And so the obviously very Black bodies to represent, you know, not just the Black bodies that are killed now, but through the transatlantic slave trade. And then the red is just is all the spilt blood.
Yeah.
And that was my intention in doing it. I had no idea that this series that I shot back then, trying to convey emotions, would become this eventually, but I found a space for it. And
Yeah.
I'm actually really happy with these. There's a series of like 5 or 6 images that I
Mm.
created from it.
It
The
really
one
comes
before
across.
with the one
Let me
before
go
with
back.
my son was something
Mm.
I was doing with this one. Uh, this is let me see how vulnerable I want to be here.
Mhm.
um,
It's up to you.
this was taken at a moment when my career for the first time was maybe taking off. I was gaining a bit of notoriety for my work, and I didn't know how to handle it. I didn't know, you know, I wasn't prepared for it. I had never imagined that I would be known
Mm.
for the work that I was doing, and I wanted to create an image that expressed how it felt.
Mm.
Because on the outside looking in, it looked like, wow, his perfect life, everything's great. He's traveling all
Yeah.
around the world, doing workshops and having
Yeah.
exhibitions, and he's winning awards for his stuff. And you have the perfect life.
Mm.
But that was just the outward. Inwardly, this is how it felt. I felt
Wow.
really suffocated. I felt like
Mm.
my art wasn't mine anymore. I felt like a performing artist, a method actor.
Mm. Mm.
I felt like now I'm creating for effect. Now I'm creating for what they're going to say about it. I'm creating so that
Mm.
it can be shown in a gallery. And what was lost in all of that was the thing that made me an artist to begin with, which was creating for myself,
Yeah.
which was creating for my own emotions, expressing myself emotionally. And so this image depicts actually how that period felt for me. And
Mm.
it's still to this day, when I see it, I can remember that just I
Mm.
felt really suffocated, and it wasn't a great time for me.
Mm.
There was a moment I actually left public. I left for 3 years. I didn't do much publicly. I left social media,
Mm.
and I think now I'm a little bit more grounded spiritually as well.
Mm.
And so, you know, obviously always still on that path of trying to be a better human, but back then this is how it felt.
Yeah, it really comes across, mashallah. This is one of these pictures where the edit itself, it makes it look like it's been drawn in like hyper realistic pencil or something like that. Like it could be
Yeah,
graphite.
subhanAllah. So it's just a style of editing that I learned to do. But I liked it with this image because for me, yeah, I think people can tell it's water,
Mm.
but because it's for me, it's an image of someone drowning.
Yeah.
And so I edited it in a way that made it kind of look like cellophane, like saran wrap,
Yeah.
like
Could be
suffocating, because
plastic. Yeah, it
yeah,
had
so
that kind of.
it's for me, there was kind of like this, it's drowning. It could just happen to be in the water,
Mm.
or if it's plastic, then something or someone is doing that to him.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you actually, it's great that we've kind of naturally found our way into this topic. How do you find
I lost you on the audio here.
Oh
Let me see
no.
if it's okay. I got you now.
Yeah, you got me back. Okay.
Okay, yeah, I got you back. Okay,
I'm
sorry.
just glad. I was just saying, I'm glad that we've naturally found our way into this topic, because I wanted to ask you about this. So for as somebody who's on a spiritual path, to be working in the arts, first of all, how do you stay
I lost you
grounded?
again. Let me,
Oh no.
let me
Should I
just
should I
see if I
stop
can
and
put it
start
on.
again?
No, I think it's. Can you hear me?
Is your battery on your earbuds going?
No, I'm good. I'm at 80% on them.
Well, that's
Let me
strange.
just let me just take them off and then put them back on real quick.
Oh, something bouncing on here. I can edit this bit out. The good thing about having the static
Okay.
image is that I can
Sorry
edit it out
about
as much as I
this.
want. No, don't worry about it. I'm sorry. I don't know if it's something that I'm doing here. What is it that's been bouncing around here?
Okay, turning my Bluetooth off. Now, if I put it on my can you hear me now?
I can hear you. Am I going to be echoing? No.
No, do you hear an echo from your voice?
I don't hear an echo.
Okay, so I can just do it without the headphones then.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so it's great that we've quite naturally come to this topic, because I wanted to ask you about how do you do that as a person who's on a spiritual path, working in the arts, which are so notorious for being for driving up the ego. If you're on if you want to be doing the opposite to your ego, what's your top tips? What's your method of staying grounded?
So perhaps I'm not the best to answer this because I don't believe I've been successful in doing that. My answer was to leave it. There was a point where I felt like, okay, you need to, and you know, I don't. I think a lot of times we have. I just mentioned to someone the other day. I said, you know, like, you know, this is actually on that topic. I said, you know, in my personal autobiography, in the narrative that I tell of my life story in my head, I find that I'm always either the humble hero or the innocent victim. And, and neither of those are going to always be 100% true all the time. And so for me, I haven't found it yet. I haven't found out how to do that yet. It's still a process. But there was a moment where I realized, okay, you didn't do enough groundwork before you pushed out and yourself out in this career, and this thing has gotten a little bit away from you. And I'm not shy to talk about that moment, because I think it's important, because I think you know, we all go through this, and sometimes we sugarcoat, you know, some of our inequities and stuff like that, and we don't talk about them candidly. But I remember I went to a mosque to give a talk, and I was the keynote speaker, and this was at the height of, again, the time this photo was taken, and I was the keynote speaker. And you know, I walk in, and you know, someone greets me and says, "Assalamu alaikum." I say, "Alaikum salam." He's like, "How are you, brother?" I said, "I'm good, alhamdulillah." And he introduced himself, and I introduced myself. He's like, "Oh, nice to meet you." And then I went, and then I kept going in the mosque, and another brother came, and he's like, "How are you?" "I'm good, alhamdulillah." I said, "What's your name?" I was like, "Oh, my name's Mustafa." And then the third person came, and the same thing happened. He's like, "Assalamu alaikum, alaikum salam." And he's like, you know, "What's your name, brother?" I said, "Oh, my name's Mustafa Davis." He's like, "Oh, mashallah, where are you from?" And then there was just a little thought that occurred in I remember it vividly, a little thought. And it was like, why don't they know who I am? And then I remember, as soon as I had that thought, I was like, oh, wow, you're gross. You are a gross human being. You expect people to know you. Like, and you're in a mosque, you're in a house of God, and you expect people to know you. And it was shortly after that I stopped. In fact, it was one of my teachers who at one point, you know, because I do marketing also for a living. And so he actually was very candid, and he told me, said, "Listen, this might be getting away from you a little bit. Stop talking about yourself. Do something that's so significant that other people have to talk about it. But you stop promoting yourself, stop doing it." And that's the moment that I left it for a while.
Wow.
And so
That's
when I
good
came,
advice.
it was great. It was 100% what I needed, because if I think about the trajectory that I was on, you can sometimes go so far you can't find your way back home.
Yeah.
And that happens to people. And I was on that path of it happening, and it became the work that I was doing became about me.
And
It
your
was no longer about
profile.
the work, right? It was no longer about, like I said, I've never done this where we sit and look at the images and talk about the intention, because I became the thing that people were interested in. I
The
became
brand.
this phenomenon. And I not only did I allow that to happen, I helped that along, and I'm not saying it, I'm not trying to disparage myself and say that, I had nefarious intent, it just ended up happening. It was just
Yeah.
part of
It's
it.
like gravity, right? You slide into
Yeah.
it, and
And
before you
the
know it.
momentum was there, and I was going, and then art becomes my livelihood at that point too. And so then there's a justification for self-promotion, because like I have to feed my family. I have my wife and kids at home. Like I have to promote myself, because I have to get, as a freelancer, I have to get that next gig, and I don't know where the next one's coming, and I might have a good month today, and that's why, like at this moment, this photo, everyone thought, because of my social media presence, oh, he's going, he's traveling to Malaysia,
he's going somewhere,
South Africa, he's going everywhere. They're not knowing that I'm like trying to figure out, how do I wire money to my wife so that she can pay for the groceries, before I get back. And that was the reality of it then. But like the outward aspect of it was like, there's this fame and like you're doing all these great things, but internally, it was a horrible time for me. So I had to leave it for a while, and that's what I did. And then coming back to it now, I make sure I have checks and balances. It doesn't mean I'm not going to falter. I'm going to falter. Like I'm a human being. Allah says that you're going to make mistakes. The best of Bani Adam that makes mistakes are those that do so and then call on God for forgiveness. And so I'm not ma'soom, like I'm not infallible. I have a nafs, and that nafs is gonna try to incite me to evil as long as I'm alive. And so I know that now, and that's the difference of me, the me back then 10 years ago. I wasn't paying attention to any of that. I was going full speed in the art now. And so now the difference is that when those things come up, okay, yeah, I remember that feeling. Let's check ourselves a little bit. And then I have conversations. Medina, I'll be honest with you. 2 days ago, I called one of my friends who's a teacher in the UK, one of my peers and friends that I was with studying overseas, by the name of Sheikh Mustafas. And he's a good friend of mine, and he's very candid with me. He's very honest with me. And so I had a conversation with him. This is just 2 days ago. You asked me this question, how do I do it? 2 days ago, I asked him, I said, do you think I should have a website that has my name on it? And it was a legitimate question. It was a legitimate crisis I was having at that day, that, maybe that's a bit much. Like maybe I should have a production company name that's like something productions. Maybe the website, having it mustafadavis.com is another step of me going down that path that I was on 10 years ago and not paying attention to it. And I might get ahead of myself. Should I not do that? And so I still have those conversations to create checks and balances with my teachers and with my peers. I no longer try to do it in a silo and assume that, just there's a path and then just go. So, I'm scared to death of going back to that state that I was in at that time. This picture is 100% how it felt. I was drowning,
Wow.
and I'm scared to death of going back there. And so I keep those checks and balances in place now.
Well, I really appreciate your honesty. I mean, it's really difficult, especially if you're a talented person, you're a talented artist, mashallah, and people will always be like, come on, you got to get out there more. There's this kind of drive and expectation that if you have some kind of skill, and it's maybe something that Allah has just blessed you with, maybe it's something that you have been honing for your entire life, but whichever way, or maybe it's a combination of them, whichever way, you've got to figure out what your intention is and where do you want it to take you. That's the thing.
Absolutely.
It's very difficult to keep.
And it's such an ongoing process. Like you mentioned, that conversation that I had about a year ago now, which is like, should I separate my spiritual art from my fine art? I'm just okay having those conversations with myself now. And I know that if I'm bouncing ideas off like-minded people and people who aren't afraid to tell me the truth, like Sayyidina Umar bin al-Khattab, he said, the one who shows me my faults is my friend.
Right. Right.
And I didn't have that at this stage. I keep pointing because I'm looking at the photos. So people are like, why is he pointing? I'm pointing at the photo on my screen. At that stage, I didn't have that. I had people who had a very keen interest in me going further because they were either working for me as managers or as agents. And so the more money that I was going to make, the better it was going to be for them.
Right.
And so I didn't have that checks and balance. I just had, like you said, people go, do more. And there's very few people that are like, I think you're getting ahead of yourself here, buddy.
Yeah, I had this kind of image this morning of like when you are extending yourself out in those directions, like you're kind of seeking sustenance. It's like a tree putting its leaves out and stretching its branches. And you know, I have this very typically English idea of an oak, but actually any tree is like that, you know, with the sort of tree that has a very wide kind of canopy.
Yeah.
And then I realized, well, first of all, it needs to have a very strong trunk. There's no way that it can have that kind of reach if it's got a spindly little flimsy trunk that's not going to be able to weather any kind of storm. But on top of that, it needs to have an equal reach downwards. It needs to be going to the core as much. If it's less, it's all gonna fall apart.
So next time I have one of those crises, I'm just gonna call you, because essentially you just said exactly what Sheikh Ibrahim said. You know, you said exactly what he said. He said, you know, be careful. He said also be careful be careful of shutting down, also as a form of performance for people.
Yeah.
Be careful of not using the gifts that Allah has given you to have a kind of easier life. And he mentioned, you know, if you put yourself out there and you're trying to achieve higher things and you're trying to do things at a higher level, then the propensity to fail is also at a higher level as well.
Yeah.
And so he said, you have to be rooted. You have to make sure that you're rooted in your prayer. You have to make sure that you're rooted in your dhikr. You have to continue your studies. You have to make sure that you have a continual spiritual practice, especially if you're going to be doing what we would maybe call spiritual art. If it's devoid of that, then you have no roots. And then those branches that you're talking about spreading out, it's just going to topple over.
Yeah. Eventually it might, you have a good run, but it's not sustainable eventually, because it's like a tree doesn't just need sun, it needs moisture and nutrients from underneath, and so it needs to be reaching to that core. So we've talked a lot about this particular photo. Mashallah, there's so rich, there's so much to talk about. Okay, tell me about this picture. I love it.
This is in South Africa, in Cape Town, in one of the townships. It's actually one of the first townships there in Cape Town, called the Lenga Township, and it's a very impoverished township. And I was doing a photography workshop there for some of the youth in the township through the Yusuf Islam Peace Train Foundation.
Oh, cool.
And these are kids who are going to go on stage and be singing some songs for us. And they were just having a meeting. That we're actually indoors here, and there's a big like kind of bay door that's overlooking the out. So I overexposed it, but I love that they were not agreeing. They were having an argument.
Yeah, you
and
can tell.
this particular girl was just not having it. And so it was just interesting to me to capture it. But then also what was very interesting to me is that because it's silhouetted, it's very, very clear, for me, myself as a Black American who doesn't know where my roots are in Africa because of the transatlantic slave trade, it's very clear that we're looking at African children here. Like the facial structure, the shape is very, very clear. And so for me, it was a kind of a coming home type moment for me. And so I just wanted to capture it.
Oh, it's so beautiful. I just love her stance, her posture. She's like, are you kidding?
Yeah, she's not having it.
But the starkness as well of the white backgrounds, and you can kind of, exactly what's going on there in that picture.
So we haven't seen a face yet in any of these.
Yeah,
images.
we still haven't. And now this is interesting because I wanted to share a few of this is actually, I think I ripped this off your website. So this has come out a little bit pixelated, but it's to compare and contrast the work that you do with color, because we've been looking all at black and white, which is very, it's very emotional. And I think a lot of people have said that really black and white captures soul. And you said to me earlier before I started recording that if you could, you would only shoot in black and white, right?
Yeah, if I had to choose, I would choose black and white for sure.
Yeah, it's very interesting. So why is it that you have chosen in some instances. It's like it's a conscious choice that you've put color into
Yeah,
certain
so my
pictures.
standard is black and white. In every scenario, I'm going to be intending to use black and white unless what I'm photographing, the colors are part of the narrative. The colors are part of the image. Now, this is something different that I shot it in color, edited it in black and white, and then I went in and added the color. And I added this photo to that colorblind series. This is one of them. And so the green is representative of Africa. And then again, the red is representative of all the blood spilt over of black bodies. And I think, I don't know exactly, but I think I wanted to use this image because it in Africa. This is that same group of kids that we saw.
Interesting.
Same group that we saw in the other one. I think the one with her hand on her hip is the girl that wasn't having it. But for me, when I was looking at this and I was editing it, it was, with the red there, to me, that symbolized death. And then them just kind of looking on, to that person who, to me, after that,
away from them.
Is no longer there, like for me, that they've passed and they're gone. So for me, it was like a memory. And so it was just, no real rhyme or reason. I just wanted to edit an image using these kids for that series to depict that emotion.
I have to say, even as a white person, I lived in East Africa for a period of time, and I felt like it was like a homecoming as well, in a sense. Because I believe we all kind of originate there, really. So it's kind of, it should be the place that we respect and honor the most, really. But anyway, this one I wanted to highlight just because I love how her scarf is flying.
Yeah, that's what I liked about it too.
Really clever shot.
And I kept it in color because her blouse matches the door.
Yeah.
To an extent, and so that was a reason for me to keep that in terms of the color contrast. It was just, this, I think this is at the Blue Mosque, if I'm not mistaken. It's either the Blue Mosque or the Suleymaniye Mosque here in Istanbul, which I love shooting at because it has these huge doors and these huge pillars, and it makes, the human element look really small.
Really tiny.
I just aesthetically, I liked how her was blowing her hijab back when she was coming through the door.
But also there's still a lot of shadow here. Even if it is technically it's a color photo, it still has that feeling of depth, of this sort of monochrome
space.
Frame.
Yeah.
So
I don't know if I can avoid that, to be honest.
It's too much a part of you. You just you paint it in somehow. Mashallah, it's a very striking element of your photography. And now this I think was an iPhone photo, right?
Yeah, this is a complete accident. This is an iPhone photo that I took in the Hagia Sophia. This is before it was, a few years ago, before it was converted back to a mosque. And so you see the floors, there's no carpets. It's just the tile, the original marble floor in there. And there was just a particular angle that when I held my camera up, the light just flared like this. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a very technical photographer. I'm sure that there's someone who can listen and say like the light is tracking this way because of this and that, whatever. I don't know why. It was just a particular angle that it did that. And then it just made me think of, like a shower of light. It looks like rain to me.
It really does.
And so I liked it and then took it.
It's interesting. I wonder why it's kind of split, like from one of these windows, which doesn't appear to be, it's just a single window, but then you have like 4 streaks of light out of each one.
It's really, right. And I actually went back at a different time and tried to duplicate it and I couldn't.
There you go. It's the kind of what's the word for it? There's a Japanese word for it. I can't remember off the top of my head. Being in the moment. There's a word for it. I will find it. I'll put it in the caption when I upload this.
Okay.
So I think this is one of the last ones I have here. I love this one. Again, it's color, but it has the same feeling of starkness.
Yeah. And his face is still slightly obscured.
Yeah, all of them. They're all a little bit like that.
I think I titled this one Picture Frame, if I can remember. I'm not really good at titling photos. And like, if you were to if there was going to be a snapshot of like my website or social media, there's probably images like this that I've posted 3 or 4 times with a different title each time. And that's because I don't sell my prints. That's not something I've done yet. And so, I'm not really good at coming up with titles with them. This was shot in Chinatown in San Francisco, California. And it was, midday, a little bit after midday. And there was just a little pocket of light. And I just camped out there because I was waiting. This was one where I was waiting for someone to walk into the light. And he just happened to walk in, and I was able to capture it. And then this is the image that was created from it.
MashaAllah. It's so cool. So I want to just ask you one more thing before I let you go, because you've been so generous. Well, here's one more. This is Istanbul, isn't it?
This is Istanbul, and that's actually the Blue Mosque and the Hagia Sophia, Hagia Sophia in the background there.
MashaAllah. And this is a color edit as well. You've painted this in some way?
Color edit, painted in post-production to give it kind of a more surreal look. I think this is me just also still trying to live out my pipe dream of being a painter.
Yeah.
If I could, I would love to paint an image like this, that didn't require me to take a photo of it. If I could paint, and if I could do that, and I could express myself that way, I imagine I wouldn't take another photo.
No, but please don't stop. Okay, I wanted to ask just one or two other little questions. Since we're on the top. Well, while I have you, and my Zoom clutches. Oh, we've got one more photo here. This is an edit as well?
And this is definitely an edit. Just going in and colorizing the drops and stylizing it to make it look like this for no other reason than I'd love art like this. I would love to be able to draw it if I could. I would draw something like this. It's just, to me, something surreal about the paint falling off the very bright yellow umbrella. This is actually taken just right outside my house here in Istanbul. And
then this kind of very faint blue behind it, it seems.
Yeah.
It's very cool. And it's interesting that you've picked something here that you talk about how if you could paint that, you would never take another photograph. But actually, we couldn't really paint that because that's natural. That's just rain, right? It's something that is that happens in nature, in creation, that we're not really fully capable. I mean, everything that we're doing artistically is just, I feel like it's an attempt to mimic this incredible artistry that you can see, for example, in like NASA photos of the Earth. And sometimes they do colorize it. They do something to it. They edit it so that it comes out and pops in different colors, or they do it with galaxies as well. But it's like, wow, like nobody could possibly make something like that. You can imitate it, but you can always tell if you go very close. You'll see the brushstrokes, and you'll see that it's not actually natural, but it's like nature is just
got it.
How can we really?
I love surreal art is my favorite. I love surreal art. I love, and I don't. It's not as interesting to me if it's very clear what it is. Like I myself, in my own experience of art, I want to have to lean in a little bit. What is that? What are they trying to say? What's the message here? And then so I could take away my own message. But that's why when some people who have looked at my work have said they've seen something and they feel this certain thing from it, I never correct them. Even if that's not what I was feeling when I took the image, because that's their experience of it. And that to me is why I love art, is that it can be interpreted differently by different people, the same piece of art.
Yeah. So last question, and this we've probably already answered this, but how does your spirituality inform or guide your photography practice?
So I think that the clearest way to answer that is that, I did leave art for a while after I converted to Islam. In fact, I broke my cameras because I was told that photography. Yeah, that Pentax K1000, I smashed it with a hammer.
No.
Because I was a young, overzealous convert. And I was told that photography was impermissible in Islam.
Seriously?
And so I didn't want to do it. And so, I smashed my camera and I left it for a number of years. And then, when I end up in Hadramaut, my wife and family and I in Tarim to study, I noticed that, there was pictures everywhere. There was photographs and portraits of scholars. And so then I really started to explore the art again, and I bought another camera, and I'm still shooting on film back then. I didn't transfer to digital till later in, I think, 2002, 2003. And so, I was taking photos on film there and developing them there. And at one point, I was asked to help with some projects that my teachers were doing. and this is when I was studying, and I didn't want to, I really wanted to study, but they said, no, this is going to be your path. And so because my teachers kind of sanctioned it and kind of, saw that inclination in me, encouraged it, and set me on that path, my art and spirituality from that point have never been separate. They've never been two different things. I've never had the angst that some Muslim artists have, where it's like, should I be doing this? I don't know. The community might shun it. As an artist, my experience after connecting with my teachers, I've never had that. And so I think spirituality was infused in me in them. And so, I think that's where it comes. And then, I still shoot for my own personal reasons and still shoot for my own personal feeling. And I'm still exploring. I think a lot of this conversation would point to that like, I don't have it figured out, and there's times where I'm still frightened, about this path, and frightened that, I'm going to have to meet Allah one day, and is it okay what I've been doing, and did I do it well? And, is it something that it might sound a little bit cheesy, kind of corny, but sometimes I imagine, if I showed my portfolio, if I put it in front of Allah, right? And then we're going to go through it now, like we just went through it. Is there going to be anything in there that's like, no, you shouldn't have done that? And so I think that's what drives me in terms of the spiritual aspect. Like you don't see in my images, I don't do fashion. I don't do these type of things where I might be forced to focus on images that might not be synonymous with my path. I just kind of don't do those things. And then I think because I haven't monetized my photography, it gives me that freedom.
Right.
And so I'm saying that to say that I have no judgment for the people who don't have that ability, who have to create to pay their bills and feed their family. I don't judge them. Like, you have to do what you have to do. I get that. I understand that. I understand that I'm approaching it from a place of privilege, that I don't have to do that. And I think that's probably why I haven't monetized my art yet. I'm afraid that maybe if I do, maybe that question would have a different answer. But in this moment, because I'm still just shooting for myself, and I'm, and it's something that the path that my teachers had set me on, I think that the two are just equally infused with all of my mistakes and with all of my faltering. That's kind of my bedrock and my foundation that I come back to at the end of the day.
SubhanAllah. Thank you so much, Mustafa. This has been such an illuminating discussion. And I'm just going to...
Excuse me for being so verbose and long.
No, not at all, because you've just opened it all up. You've kind of put little keys into the locks, and it's like, click. Now I can kind of understand photography a lot better, and me not as a photographer, that's really saying something. So I really appreciate it. Long may you produce amazing art that uplifts people's spirits, and may it always bring reward in many ways. Inshallah.